The account distribution feature has an option to distribute your financial activity to your production details on a percent of acres basis using the acreage stored in your crop production center details. That means that CenterPoint can do the calculation for you instead of you having to do that calculation manually. In addition to learning how to do a distribution on a per acre basis, we will talk about how to manage some crops that might consume more expenses than other crops. That might be because they're more labor intensive, they require more machine work, or a variety of other reasons. And we'll discuss how to add a weighting factor to those crops. Let's start out by creating an account distribution, and we can do that by going to Setup, Accounts, and Distributions. Now I've got a variety of distributions out there, and you can have as many distributions as you need for different purposes. I also, in this database, have two companies. I have a farm and an orchard. So the distribution I'm creating is for my farm. I'm going to go ahead and click New, and what you need to do is give it an abbreviation and a name. Actually, the abbreviation is actually optional. All of them are going to be marked, or all of your distributions are going to be marked as active by default. If you no longer need this sometime down the road, you can just come in and take the active status off. There's a place for you to put in a more detailed description if you want a more detailed description, so when you come back later, you know why you created this distribution. I'm going to go to the distribution detail, and I'm going to click New to create our first portion. In this particular distribution, I'm only going to have one portion because I'm splitting all of my crops on a per acre basis. So I'm going to do it all in one portion. However, there's many times where you want to create multiple portions. Like, for example, on my overhead, I want to split it between crops and livestock. Crops I'm going to allocate on a per acre basis, and the livestock I might allocate a different way. So I would have two portions here, and I would split them by a percentage. In this case, I'm going to do one whole portion for all 100% of the amount. And when you go ahead and create one of these portions, you can select how you're going to distribute it. So what kind of type of distribution are you going to use? Are you going to do a percentage? And if you use a percentage, then you've got to fill in a grid similar to the one you see below, where you split it out and put in your individual percentages. You can do a per acre distribution, which is what we're going to talk about in this video, per head for livestock, per unit of crop production, and per operator acres. And that's similar to the per acres, except it's only using the operator acres off of the leases. Okay, so we are going to choose the per acre option. And anytime you change the type, it's going to pop up a message like this, just warning you that if you've filled in the grid at the bottom, you're now going to lose it because we're changing the type. So I'm going to say yes to that. When selecting your crop production center details that you want to do the per acre distribution to, do you want to select them by profit center, or do you want to select them by individual production center? I'm going to select them by my profit center, and I'm going to move over just 3 of my profit centers, my corn, my soybeans, and my wheat. I'm going to move to the right-hand side. Now, when your timing is set to at transaction, this first checkbox is enabled. If it is set to the timing of later, that checkbox becomes disabled. So if you're using this distribution at transaction, there's 2 ways that it can select the production center details that match these profit centers. It can either use the production center details that are marked as accepting distributions. And if you leave it unchecked, that's what it'll do, is it'll just use the ones that are marked as accepting distributions. If you check this box, then it's going to use the production center details that match the production year in your transaction. So if you're in January of the current year and you're doing a distribution for expenses that were incurred really last year, you can allocate those to last year's production center details simply by putting in the production year. But this checkbox needs to be enabled. Okay, the second checkbox has to do with what acres it's actually going to use. If you uncheck this, then for each of your production center details, The system is going to include the total acreage. Well, you may have leases that are set up where you share that crop with a landlord, or you share it with another company within your database. And so by checking this box, it's only going to use your portion of the acres. So for example, if you had a 50-50 split with another company in your database, it would only use 50% of the acres in doing your per acre distribution. Okay, so that's what that checkbox is for. Now, the last thing is the timing on the distribution. If I choose at transaction, then each and every transaction gets the distribution, which can create a lot of journal lines. The problem with that, the biggest problem with that is many times you're doing these distributions before your crop production center details are solidified. So you might have a plan of how you're going to plant your fields, but weather or other conditions might change that plan. And so if you do this distribution in January and then want to update it, if you've used the at transaction, the only way to really update it is to go in and edit each and every transaction. And I don't think you want to do that. So the other option is a later option. The later option would allow you to enter in the transaction and have it attached to this distribution. And then at a prescribed frequency, we would go to another screen to apply the distribution. And what it does in the apply distribution transaction is it gathers up all of the transactions that had a distribution marked as later. And it creates one journal entry at that time period to distribute out all of those expenses, okay, that previously went in as undistributed. And that's all done in one transaction. So if, any of the details change, you only have to modify or delete and rerun that one transaction rather than editing all of these individual transactions. Okay, so that's the advantage of it, but there's clearly still a reason sometimes where you want to do the distribution at the transaction time. So both timing methods are valid. I'm going to leave mine at later, and I want to assign this to an account or some accounts as the default distribution so that it comes up by default every time I select that account. But you see that I can't get to that tab until I save the distribution and come back in and edit it. So now I'm going to go to the Assign Account tabs. I'm going to select the company I'm assigning the accounts for, and then I'm going to select the accounts that I want to assign this to. Well, I'm only going to assign it to one account right now, so I'm going to move that account over to the right-hand side. But you can assign it to as many accounts as you need, and even if it isn't assigned to an account, you can still select that distribution in a transaction and use it. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save on that, and then we're going to go ahead and enter in a transaction using that account. So I'm going to open up the payment screen. I'm going to choose my repairs expense. We're going to date this transaction and then put in the amount, which is $1,000. And the account that we had assigned that to was the repairs equipment account. So I'm going to select that repairs expense equipment. And you notice that the distribution button shows up as orange. So when there is a default distribution on an account, it will show up as orange, which also means that if you went to the detail screen and entered in like a profit center, it's not going to use that profit center. It's still going to use the distribution. So distribution overrides anything of any other details that you might have entered in. Okay, if I click on that button, whether it was gray because you didn't have a distribution or whether it's orange because there was a distribution on it, you come up with the same screen. So if I wanted to remove the distribution, I could uncheck that and it removes it just for this transaction. If it was an account that never had a distribution on it, I could simply check that box and then select the distribution I want in the distribution box. If this one had a default distribution and I wanted to change it, I could just change it to one of my other distributions. Whatever distribution you select, down below, you should be able to click on the plus sign and open it up and see how it got distributed. Well, because my timing was later, my distribution went in as just, $1,000 with no details on it, but it's attached to this distribution. Had this been a timing of at transaction, I would see the breakdown as to how much went to each profit center, production center, and production year. I'm going to click OK on that, and we're going to save the transaction. Okay, so I'm going to continue to enter in multiple transactions for that month, for that quarter, or for that year. And at some point, I need to go back and run the distribution at the prescribed frequency. Now, you set up that prescribed frequency in the setup of your companies. So under setup of companies, I'm going to edit my company and go to additional detail. On this screen, there's a question that asks you about distribution frequency, and mine's set to monthly. So that means that I need to apply those distributions once a month. So even if I wait until May, I still need to go back to January and apply the distribution for January. If I do quarterly, then I only have to do it quarterly, and it creates one journal entry for the whole quarter at the end of the quarter. And if I do it annually, then it only creates one journal entry to distribute everything from throughout the year at the end of the year. Okay, I'm going to choose monthly. That's the most common. Now, before I run the distribution, I also want to make sure that I'm only distributing this to the crop production center details that I should be distributing them to. This is the beginning of the year, so I want to make sure last year's are turned off. So I'm going to go to Setup, Profit Centers and Production Centers, and Crop Production Center Details. So I'm going to edit this 2024 one, and you'll notice that it's still marked as accepting distributions, even though I'm in 2025. So I'm going to turn those 2024 ones off. So I can do that. It's a group. I can highlight all of them, and I could go to Mass Update, click Next, say that I want to change the accepting distributions flag. It's now set to yes. I'm going to set it to no. Click Next. You'll see that it's going to update it to no. Click Next again and accept it. Now it's changed those 2024 distributions to not having accepting distributions on it. Okay, now I want to make sure that the 2025 ones do have accepting distributions on. So I'm going to highlight those, go back to Mass Update, click Next, choose accepting distributions, and you can see that they're already set to yes, so I can click cancel to exit that. I'm going to close out of there. That makes me ready to go ahead and run my apply distributions transaction. Now mine was set to monthly, so I'm going to run it on a monthly basis. So I'm going to go to Processes, Periodic, and Apply Distributions. You can see that we've applied our distributions for all of 2024. So now I'm ready to apply my distribution for 2025. And I could do that by clicking Create New, choosing the company. I can let it assign a transaction number, and it'll increment from there. And I can put in memo lines and a notation. I'm going to click OK. And you'll see that it's gathered up more than just the repairs expense. There's been other transactions that have had a distribution that had a later time on it. So it's also gathered up those. But if I open up that repair one, you can see the journal entry that it's going to create. It's going to credit that expense for the $1,000 with no details on it to back out our original transaction. And then it's going to re-debit that same expense, allocating it out to my crops and my fields based on the percent of acres in those crop production center details. Okay, so you can see here that this wheat one was an amount of $52.94, and this corn blacktop was $223.53. Well, how did it get to that? I have a little chart that's going to show you how the calculation occurred. You can see here on this chart that I have all of my crop production center details for 2025 listed and the acres that we're using. Okay, so whether they are transaction company acres, this is actually the transaction company acres, and the total amount is 850. So for that corn blacktop, there was 190 acres. So we took 190, divided it by 850, and came up with the percentage, and then we simply multiplied that by the 1,000. And we did the same thing for the wheat. We went and divided it by the 850, came up with that percentage, and then multiplied that by the $1,000. And so that's how we came up with those amounts. And we could verify that just back here on this grid. You have the 5294 and you have the 22353 that we were looking at. Okay, if everything is good, you could go ahead and click post on that, and then I would see that as a transaction down below. And I could come back in later and edit it, change a distribution, or I could delete this and rerun it at a later time. Okay, and I'm going to delete mine. And we're going to talk now about some crops that might need an additional weighting. Okay, there's a couple different ways to use distributions to give one crop a little more weighting, maybe because it is more labor intensive, uses more equipment, or whatever other reason you have for that. And the first way to do that is right through your profit centers. So underneath setup and profit and production centers, I'm going to go to profit centers, and we're going to edit this wheat profit center. Each one of your profit centers by default has a distribution factor on it of 1. That means they all get treated equal. Okay, now if you have a profit center that you want to get less distribution, you would put in an amount less than 1, like 0.75. If you want it to get more distribution, you would put in a higher amount, such as 1.5. Okay, so I'm going to do that to the wheat distribution or the wheat profit center. And then I'm going to close out of here, and we're going to go back to that apply distributions, and we're going to see how that affected the amount that went to wheat. Previously, the amount that went to wheat was $52.94. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and go to periodic and go to apply distributions. We're going to rerun that distribution. So I'm going to go ahead and choose the farm and click OK, and I'm going to open it up. Now, $52.94 was the amount previously going to wheat, but now we've increased it, so now it's using $77.36. Now, for the blacktop cornfield, the previous amount was $223.53, and it is now $217.77. Okay, so you can see that it's reduced that one because it's put more of the distribution to wheat. So what's the calculation that occurred there? I'm going to bring up another chart to show you that. So in this chart, I have the same production details, but this time wheat, instead of having 45 acres, is set to 67.5. And that's because we do this calculation of the number of acres times that distribution factor, and that distribution factor is 1.5. So that gives us 67.5, which increases our total acres to 872.50. So now we just did the same basic calculations that we did before, and this time it results in a different result for both the wheat and for the corn. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and close this, and we can post that transaction. Now, there's another way to change the way that weighting happens, and that's right through the distribution itself. Now, remember, when I created my distribution, I only had one part to it. So I took all of the crops and I distributed them all the same way using the same amount. Okay, now underneath setup and accounts and account distributions, I have another distribution set up called my grain distribution. And when I go to the detail on this one, you can see that I've broken this one down into different parts. So I was able to say that I want 35% of the total amount to go to soybeans, and then that 35% is going to get spread on a per acre basis across my soybean fields. For wheat, I wanted 20%, and then that 20% is going to get spread among my wheat fields on a per acre basis. And then the same with corn. The corn gets the remaining 45%. The percentages just need to add up to 100 on that. Okay, so we'll see how this one works. This one was set up to do everything at the time of transaction. So we'll see how this distribution works at the time of transaction. And you'll see here that I've assigned this to my marketing expense account. So that's the account we're going to use in the transaction. So I'm going to go to payments, and we're going to choose our elevator, and we're going to put in this distribution. Again, I'm going to use the amount $1,000 because it makes it easy to see how the distribution occurred. We're going to choose the account marketing expense. We'll see that the distribution is happening, and I'm going to click on that button and I'm going to open up that distribution. So here you see the wheat. The wheat's the easiest one to see. It's going to get 20% of the $1,000, which is $200. And because it only had one field of wheat, all $200 is going to that one field of wheat. Now with corn, it got 45%, so it got $450, but we split that $450 among our different corn fields. Okay, and then did the same thing for soybeans. Okay, so that's another way to change it from a total per acre distribution by controlling the weightings that go to each of the crops. And I'm going to go ahead and close that. And as you can see through these examples, there's many ways to tackle a distribution and to change the weighting of certain crops.